Imagine this: a lone night guard, patrolling a quiet building when he spots a lost elderly woman standing by the entrance. Thinking she's just confused, he approaches to help, but what happens next will leave you speechless. As he leads her to the elevator, she suddenly vanishes, and the security footage shows him waving at someone who isn't there. What was the woman's true purpose? Was it just a trick of the mind, or something far more sinister? Stay tuned as we uncover the chilling mystery behind the night guard's ghostly visitor, and the dark secrets lurking within the building. It's a typical night shift for Luis Alvarez, a seasoned night guard at an office building in the heart of downtown. The building is empty, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound as he makes his rounds. He's done this countless times, knowing each corner, each floor, and every inch of the building like the back of his hand. The only thing that ever disrupts the monotony of his shift is the occasional noise or flicker of the lights, nothing out of the ordinary for a late night. Security guard? But on the night of January 14th, 2021, something happened that would change everything. It was around 2:30 a.m., and Luis had just finished checking the lower levels of the building when he noticed something strange in the security camera footage. There, on one of the monitors, he saw an elderly woman standing by the door to the building, staring at it, motionless. She was wearing a long, dark coat and had an air of confusion about her, as though she were lost. This wasn't unusual, at least not at first glance. Occasionally, people get disoriented in the late hours, especially around this part of town, which was quiet and almost desolate at night. Luis, never one to ignore a potential safety issue, decided to approach her. He left his post and began making his way toward the entrance. The building was a large high-rise structure, and the faint echo of his footsteps on the marble floors was the only sound in the otherwise quiet building. As he neared the entrance, he waved to the woman, who didn't seem to acknowledge him right away. But after a few seconds, she turned toward him. He made his way outside to speak with her. She appeared disoriented. But Luis, always helpful, asked her if she needed assistance. She looked at him with tired, vacant eyes and muttered that she was lost and needed to get to her destination. At first, Luis thought she might be confused, maybe had wandered from the nearby hospital or one of the residential buildings. However, he was taken aback when she began to ask him about something strange, something that didn't make sense. She inquired about the stairs, but there was no mention of any staircase in the area she was in. This struck Luis as odd, because the building was known for its modern elevator-equipped floors. No stairs had been used in years. The mention of stairs seemed out of place, but Luis, still trying to be helpful, nodded and led her toward the elevator. Luis was waiting with the elderly woman by the elevator when something inexplicable happened. The moment he looked down to check his phone, trying to call the building's maintenance team to assist her, he heard a faint sound. When he looked up, the woman had vanished. There was no trace of her, no footsteps leading away, no sign of movement from the elevator. In an instant, she was gone. His heart began to race as he checked every corner of the building, wondering if she had simply disappeared into one of the offices or had taken another route. But there was no sign of her anywhere. What followed was even more chilling. The security footage he reviewed moments later confirmed that Luis had been standing in front of the elevator at the exact moment the woman appeared. Yet the footage, which should have captured her movements, showed only Luis standing alone, no one else in sight. The timestamp on the footage showed exactly 2:39 a.m. The strange thing was that the footage clearly showed Luis waving to someone invisible, someone who was not there. The timestamp was accurate, but there was no trace of the elderly woman on the camera feed, despite Luis's clear interaction with her just moments earlier. Luis was shaken. He couldn't explain it. He immediately called his supervisor to report the incident. He was told that they'd look into it, but as the hours passed, Luis grew more unsettled. The woman had vanished, and the footage seemed to confirm it. The following morning, he began to question everything. Was this a trick of the mind, or had something more inexplicable occurred? Luis spent the rest of the shift watching the footage again, over and over, trying to piece together what had happened. But no matter how many times he watched, the footage showed no trace of the woman. He checked his own report, the time logs, and even reviewed other security footage from different angles. But the result was the same. The woman had never been captured on the cameras, even though Luis had interacted with her in real time. A few days after the incident, Luis returned to work, still haunted by the night's events. He decided to do a little digging of his own. He pulled up the historical records of the building, and that S when he found something unsettling. The building's history contained several strange reports of ghostly sightings, but they were always dismissed as fabrications or pranks. The most alarming part, however, was an entry from 1973, an incident involving a woman who had gone missing after being lost in the building. She was found several days later, but her death was ruled an accident, and the cause was never fully explained. Could this be the same woman? Luis couldn't shake the feeling that he was dealing with something much larger than he understood. Could this woman, or rather, this spirit, have been haunting the building? Was there a supernatural force at work? And if so, what had caused her to appear to him specifically? Was it merely a coincidence? Or was there something more sinister at play? Theories about Luis's encounter began to circulate among his co-workers. Some speculated that it was a simple trick of the mind, perhaps fatigue or stress from the long hours. Others suggested that it could have been an elaborate prank, though no one could explain how the footage showed no trace of the woman. The possibility that it was something paranormal began to take root among the employees who had heard Luis's story. After all, there had been rumors circulating about the building for years, though no one had ever spoken up. The stories were hushed whispers, ignored by the building's management, and dismissed as mere folklore. Some of Luis's co-workers even started to experience odd occurrences themselves, flickering lights, strange cold spots, and unexplained sounds at night. Others reported hearing footsteps when no one was around, and a few even claimed to have felt a presence following them. Was it possible that Luis had encountered something beyond the realm of the ordinary? Could this visitor be the spirit of the woman who had tragically passed away in the building years ago? Despite the growing suspicions and the chilling experiences shared by his co-workers, the official investigation was quiet. No one came forward to officially corroborate the idea of a ghostly visitor, and no action was taken by management. The unexplained events went largely ignored, with some employees quietly choosing to keep their distance from the building at night. Was this something the building owners were hiding, or were they just unwilling to confront the possibility of a supernatural presence? Theories continued to develop among the staff, but no one could explain the unexplainable. The footage remained in the hands of the management, and no one could say what happened to it after that night. Did Luis's encounter point to something beyond this world, or was it simply a fleeting moment in a stressful night shift? Why were no further investigations made into Luis's encounter? Why did the management of the building remain so quiet, especially considering the history of paranormal reports tied to the place? What was being hidden, if anything? The unanswered questions linger in the air, and the mystery of the night guard's unexpected visitor remains unsolved, an eerie reminder that sometimes the truth about the things we cannot explain is something we may never fully understand. As the weeks passed, Luis tried to move on from the incident, but the memories continued to haunt him. The strange encounter with the elderly woman, or whatever she had been, seemed to linger in the back of his mind. He tried to convince himself that it was just a trick of the light, perhaps a moment of exhaustion, or an odd visual distortion from the security camera feed. But deep down, he knew that what he had witnessed didn't have a logical explanation. The tension in the building grew as well. The employees who worked late shifts, like Luis, began sharing stories of their own strange experiences. Some claimed to hear whispers in the dark corners of the building, while others spoke of shadows moving in places where there should have been no one. A few employees even mentioned that they felt as though they were being watched, even when they were alone in the building. These stories weren't enough to cause a panic, but they created an unsettling atmosphere that no one could ignore. It was long before other employees began to notice that the building itself seemed to have an unusual energy at night. The lights would flicker more often, and doors would creak open without explanation. Occasionally, the elevator would travel between floors by itself, even when no one had summoned it. These were small, eerie occurrences that might be dismissed as the result of old machinery. But combined with the other strange happenings, they began to fuel suspicions that something was wrong in the building. Luis, however, couldn't let go of what he had seen. The more he reflected on it, the more he became convinced that the elderly woman, or the figure that had appeared to him, wasn't just a random person who had wandered into the building. There was something about the way she had behaved, her vacant stare, Her cryptic words about the stairs, and her sudden disappearance that felt otherworldly. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a one-off incident. He was beginning to suspect that the building itself was hiding something, a dark secret tied to its past. One evening, as Luis was walking the halls, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He pulled up the old records of the building's history. The documents, he found the names of previous tenants and owners, along with some unusual incidents that had been recorded over the years. In 1972, a fire had broken out on the third floor of the building, claiming the life of an elderly woman who was never identified. According to the reports, the woman had been seen in the building just before the fire, but no one had been able to find out who she was or how she had gotten there. The incident was quickly swept under the rug, and the building continued its operations as if nothing had happened. Could the figure Luis had seen on the security camera be the same woman? Could she have been haunting the building for all these years, waiting for someone to acknowledge her presence? Luis wasn't sure, but he felt an intense need to investigate further. The building's history, with its dark moments and unexplained tragedies, seemed to be connected to the strange occurrences he and his co-workers were experiencing. There had to be more to the story. Luis began to ask around, speaking with longtime employees and anyone who had worked in the building before. He gathered stories of strange noises, odd sightings, and feelings of being watched, but no one seemed willing to talk openly about it. Most employees dismissed the incidents as building quirks or overactive imaginations. But Luis could sense that many of them were just too afraid to confront the possibility of something supernatural. One of the maintenance workers, however, finally opened up to him. The man who had worked in the building for over 20 years told Luis about a strange event that had occurred in the 1980s. The man claimed that a cleaning crew had found a room locked away on the top floor that no one knew existed. The room was filled with old, dusty furniture, including a broken mirror and a rocking chair that seemed out of place in such a professional building. The workers had reported hearing soft whispers emanating from the room, but when they tried to enter, the door refused to open. After a few attempts, the crew decided to leave the room undisturbed, but the strange occurrences continued. Over time, the whispers grew louder, and more employees began to experience unsettling feelings in the vicinity of the top floor. Luis was shocked by the revelation. Could this hidden room be connected to the spirit he had seen? Was this where the elderly woman had lived or perhaps passed away? And why had it been locked away, seemingly forgotten by everyone? Determined to uncover the truth, Luis returned to the top floor to investigate. He made his way to the area where the hidden room was said to be located. After searching through old records and maps of the building, he found a dusty, unmarked door that led to an unused storage area. The door was locked, but there was something about it that felt ... wrong. It seemed as though it had been deliberately sealed off, almost as if someone had tried to keep it hidden. Luis picked the lock and cautiously stepped inside. The room was small and filled with forgotten objects, old furniture, unused equipment, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. But what caught his attention was the large mirror that hung on the far wall. It was cracked, its surface fractured into countless pieces, but there was something haunting about it. It was as if the mirror itself had been watching, waiting. Luis stood in front of the mirror, his reflection distorted by the cracks. As he stared, he felt a chill crawl up his spine. Suddenly, he heard a faint whisper, just like the one the maintenance worker had described. The sound came from behind him, and when he turned, there was nothing there. His heart raced as the whisper grew louder, and for a moment, he felt a cold hand brush against his shoulder. Panicking, Luis fled the room, locking the door behind him. He was shaken to the core. What had just happened? Was this all in his mind, or had he really encountered something supernatural? Could the building truly be haunted, as he now suspected? The following day, Luis reviewed the footage from the security cameras once again. To his horror, he noticed something that he had missed the night before. His own reflection in the mirror was distorted, just like the stories of the past. And in the reflection, standing behind him, was a figure, a shadowy outline of the elderly woman he had encountered. Luis was left with more questions than answers. Was it possible that the building was indeed haunted, with a restless spirit that had been trapped for decades? And if so, what had happened to her, and why was she haunting the building? Had she died in the fire, or was there something more sinister at play here? Something the building's owners and management had kept hidden for all these years. What if there was a cover-up at the core of this mystery? Why were certain areas of the building sealed off and forgotten? Was there something being deliberately hidden from the public? Luis knew that the only way to get answers was to continue digging. But with every step he took, the more he realized that uncovering the truth might come at a high cost. What else was lurking in the dark corners of the building, waiting to be discovered? And would he be able to handle what lay ahead? What happened to the elderly woman in the building? Why were there so many odd occurrences tied to that floor? Why were certain parts of the building sealed off without explanation? The truth was out there, but whether Luis or anyone would ever find it was another question entirely. And with that, the mystery of the night guard's ghostly visitor remains unsolved, leaving everyone to wonder if some spirits are just waiting for someone to see them and perhaps uncover the secrets they've been guarding for so long. Luis couldn't shake the image of the elderly woman's shadowy reflection standing behind him in the cracked mirror. The whispers in the room, the cold touch on his shoulder, and the feeling that something or someone was watching him, it all felt too real to be a mere figment of his imagination. He knew he couldn't ignore what had just happened, but he was also aware that his investigation was about to delve into territory that could push him beyond the edge of sanity. The very next night, Luis returned to the building, this time armed with a camera to document everything. He was determined to capture proof, something solid, to show that what he had experienced wasn't just a hallucination or coincidence. As he made his rounds, he felt the familiar tension in the air. The building that had once felt like a safe, predictable place now felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The top floor, the location of the hidden room, was now his primary focus. As he approached it, the atmosphere seemed to grow colder. His breath visibly fogged in front of him, even though the temperature inside the building was far from freezing. The elevator, which was normally quick to respond, made a strange dragging sound as it ascended. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the hall. He couldn't deny it anymore. The building was alive with something else. Luis hesitated at the door to the hidden room. It was locked once again, but this time he had brought a flashlight and his camera, along with some tools to open it if needed. He breathed in deeply, gathering his courage, and then, without looking back, he picked the lock again. This time, as the door creaked open, the air inside felt different, heavy, thick, with an energy that was hard to describe. The faint whispers he had heard before were now louder, more distinct, as if they were coming from within the walls. The room, however, was still the same. The old furniture, the dusty shelves, and the cracked mirror all sat in place, but the feeling of being watched intensified. He pointed his flashlight towards the mirror, which now seemed to draw him in, almost as if it were calling him closer. He took a few steps forward, the floorboards groaning underfoot. His camera, aimed directly at the mirror, began to flicker, the image distorting. And then, for a brief moment, the reflection didn't match the reality. The mirror showed a much younger version of the elderly woman, her face clearer, more solid than it had been the first time he saw her. She appeared to be beckoning, standing at the edge of the reflection, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if trying to say something, but no sound came from her lips. Luis took a few more steps, his pulse quickening. Damn. And then suddenly the lights in the room went out, plunging him into complete darkness. His heart raced as the whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of voices, all speaking in a language he didn't understand. He spun around, trying to regain his bearings, but when the lights flickered back on, the mirror was completely empty. The woman was gone. His hands trembled as he checked the camera footage. The image on the screen showed him standing alone in front of the mirror, his own reflection now distorted, the edges of the frame warping as though it were struggling to hold something back. That's when the camera caught something else on the screen. The elderly woman's face appeared in the reflection, but only for a fraction of a second before it vanished again. Luis couldn't explain what was happening. He had known that something was wrong in the building, but this was beyond anything he had ever experienced. Was this a ghost? A spirit trapped in the building for decades? Or was there something more sinister at play? Had the building become a vessel for something darker, something tied to its history? Luis began to wonder if the building itself was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had met tragic ends there. Unable to process it all, Luis left the building in a hurry that night. But the images of what he had witnessed stayed with him, each moment replaying in his mind. The feeling of being watched never quite left him, not even when he was at home. It was as though the building's presence had followed him, lingering in the corners of his vision, always just out of reach, but ever present. Luis was now caught in a cycle of fear and obsession. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of uncovering something much bigger than he had anticipated. The unanswered questions about the building, the mysterious woman, the unexplained occurrences were beginning to overwhelm him. What had happened to the elderly woman? Was she a spirit trapped in the building after her death, or was there a deeper mystery behind her presence? The more Luis looked into it, the more troubling details emerged. The building as history seemed to contain numerous instances of unexplained deaths and disappearances, most of them either ignored or dismissed by authorities. It was as if the building itself had been a place where something dark festered, and the people who died there were forgotten, their stories buried along with them. Luis spoke to a few old employees, hoping to uncover more. One elderly janitor, who had worked in the building for decades, mentioned that some of the older staff members had always been reluctant to talk about the top floor. He said it was rumored to be a place where bad things happened, a place where employees who had worked late often disappeared or never returned the next day. However, the janitor was quick to warn Luis that some stories are better left untold. As Luis continued his research, he stumbled upon more unsettling findings. According to archived records, several of the building's original architects had mysteriously vanished without a trace. The workers involved in constructing the top floors also faced strange accidents, one of which resulted in the death of a foreman who was said to have fallen from the building's roof. Could these incidents be linked to the woman Luis had encountered? Or was there something more malevolent at play? Was the building itself somehow cursed? Theories began to swirl. Some speculated that the elderly woman might have been the victim of a tragic accident during the building's construction, her spirit lingering, unable to move on. Others suggested that the dark energy in the building had attracted her spirit, trapping her in a loop. Some even believed that the building's hidden room, the locked-off areas, and the old mirror were all conduits, amplifying the supernatural forces within the building. But no matter what Luis discovered, there remained one pressing question. Why had the building been sealed off in certain areas? Why were certain stories ignored or buried? Had the owners of the building, who had remained strangely silent throughout the investigation, covered up these events? Were they afraid of what the truth might reveal, or was there something they wanted to keep hidden from the public? Luis could not let go of the feeling that this was indeed just a case of a haunting. Something was being kept from him, something that linked the strange events of the past with the bizarre occurrences he was now witnessing. Could this all be a coincidence, or was there a deeper conspiracy at work, one that stretched back decades? The building had secrets, dark ones, and Luis was now certain that he was about to uncover them, whether he was ready or not. The question was, would the truth be worth the danger that came with exposing it? As he returned to the building, a sense of dread washed over him. He knew that whatever happened next would either provide the answers he desperately sought or push him further into a world he was unsure he could escape. The days that followed were filled with unease for Luis. As he prepared to return to the building, he couldn't shake the gnawing sense of dread that had become an uninvited companion. It wasn't just the fear of encountering the mysterious woman again. It was the growing suspicion that there was something deeply wrong with the building itself, something that went beyond the supernatural, and was tied to a dark history that had been buried for far too long. Luis made his way back to the building, determined to uncover what had been hidden all these years. He couldn't shake the thought that his recent experiences, his eerie encounters with the spirit, the strange camera footage, the whispers in the dark, were all connected to something larger than just a haunting. As he entered the building that night, he noticed something different in the air. The usual stillness that once made him feel comfortable now felt oppressive, as though the very walls were holding their breath. He headed straight for the top floor, the place where he had encountered the elderly woman and where the hidden room was located. As he walked through the dark corridors, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, he couldn't help but feel a deep unease. Every step echoed in the silence, but this time, it It was indeed just the emptiness of the building. He was aware of it, was the sensation of being watched. His heart raced, but he pressed on, determined to get answers. Upon reaching the hidden room, Luis noticed that the door which he had previously locked was ajar. A chill ran down his spine. He knew he had locked it the night before. It was as if something or someone had been inside since his last visit. He pushed the door open slowly, his breath caught in his throat. The room, still filled with dust and forgotten relics, seemed unchanged, but there was a distinct difference in the air. It felt heavier, as though it had been disturbed. Luis stepped inside, shining his flashlight around the room. The old mirror was in the same spot, its cracks still haunting, but now there was something new. A faint, wet stain had appeared on the floor beneath it, almost as if something had dripped from the mirror itself. Luis knelt to get a closer look. The stain was dark, and as he touched it, he realized it wasn't just moisture. It was sticky, like something had leaked out of the glass. Suddenly, a sound came from behind him. A soft shuffle, followed by a low groan. Luis spun around, heart pounding in his chest. The room, which had been empty just moments before, now felt alive with movement. The whispers grew louder again, and this time, they were clearer. They weren't in another language as Luis had initially thought. They were in English. The words were muffled, but still discernible. Help, ... me ... And then a chilling phrase, trapped ... trapped in the glass ... Luis's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows across the room. For a moment, he thought he saw the reflection of the elderly woman in the cracked mirror, but when he turned to face her, the mirror was empty again. His blood ran cold. The sensation of being watched intensified as the whispers grew more frantic. The woman's voice was no longer soft and distant. It was desperate, pleading for release. Luis backed away slowly, his mind racing. He needed to leave the room, but his legs felt heavy, as though the room itself was holding him in place. He tried to turn, but the door wouldn't budge. Panic set in as he realized that the door had somehow locked itself from the inside. His attempts to open it were futile. The building had never felt so alive, so malevolent. Then, without warning, the mirror began to distort. Luis watched, wide-eyed, as the cracks in the glass began to widen, forming patterns that looked almost like words, like the reflection was trying to communicate with him. The whispers grew louder, now fully forming into the phrase, "Help me, trapped in the glass. ... You must let me out." Luis's breath hitched. What was this? Was it the spirit of the elderly woman? Or was there something more sinister at play here? Was the mirror itself the source of the haunting? Is it somehow trapping her spirit, or perhaps something even darker inside? His mind raced, trying to piece together everything he had learned about the building's history. The mysterious fire, the locked-off rooms. The disappearance of the foreman, all of it seemed to point to one unsettling conclusion. The building was more than just a place for people to work or live. It was a prison for something or someone that had been trapped there for decades. Luis, now desperate, felt a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't going to let whatever this was take control of him. His hands trembling, he grabbed his phone and took a photo of the mirror, hoping the camera would capture something, anything that could provide a clue as to what was happening. The moment he took the photo, the lights flickered and the whispers stopped. The room fell silent. The air seemed to clear, and the door clicked open on its own. Luis didn't hesitate, rushed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. His heart pounded in his chest as he ran down the hall, not daring to look back. When he finally reached the safety of the main floor, he paused to catch his breath. His mind was a whirlwind. What had just happened? Was it possible that the building itself was haunted? Or had he stumbled upon something much more terrifying? The encounter with the elderly woman who seemed to be trapped, desperate to communicate, had left him shaken. What was she trying to tell him? Why had she chosen him to reveal this dark secret? Luis wasn't sure he had the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Something sinister was happening inside the building. House. Something that had been hidden for far too long. The photos he had taken were now in his possession, but he didn't know if anyone would believe him. Would the authorities dismiss his claims? Would anyone take his warning seriously? The building's history, with its strange occurrences and unanswered questions, seemed to be tied to something much older than he had realized. Could the elderly woman's spirit truly be trapped there? Or was the building a place for something even darker, something not of this world? Luis was determined to find out. But he also knew that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous his investigation would become. What would happen if he uncovered something too dark to handle? What if the building had its own agenda, one that didn't want its secrets to be revealed? Luis couldn't stop now. The mystery of the building, the woman, and the supernatural events he had witnessed was far from over. He had a feeling that what he had uncovered was just the beginning of something far more terrifying. But the question remained, what was the building hiding, and who or what was still trapped inside? And if Luis continued to dig deeper, would he be able to handle the truth? Or would he become the next to disappear, a victim of the building's dark past? The answers were waiting, but the cost of uncovering them might be more than Luis could afford. The deeper he went, the more he felt as though the building itself was watching, waiting for him to make his next move. Luis couldn't shake the feeling that he had opened a door that shouldn't have been touched. The more he thought about it, the more everything seemed to connect: the whispers, the distorted reflections, the dark history of the building, and the eerie presence that had followed him. What had started as an odd encounter with a lost elderly woman had turned into something far more: sinister mystery tied to the very foundation of the building itself. Despite his fear, Luis knew he couldn't stop now. The haunting was no coincidence, and the secrets buried in the building's history were far from ordinary. The distorted mirror, the sudden vanishing of the woman, and the feeling of being trapped had all pointed to one thing. There was something in that building, something ancient, the dark that needed to be uncovered. Luis was now more determined than ever to get to the bottom of this mystery, but he couldn't help but wonder, would he uncover the truth? Or would he fall victim to whatever force lurked within the building's walls? As he prepared to continue his investigation, he knew there was no turning back. The building seemed alive, its history written in shadows and echoes, and Luis was just one small piece in a much larger puzzle. Would he unravel the truth about the ghostly woman and the building's dark past? Or would he disappear into the night, another victim of a place that would never let go of its secrets? If you found this story as chilling as we did, make sure to like, comment, and share this video with others who are fascinated by eerie encounters and unexplained phenomena. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more investigations into paranormal mysteries, where we dig deep into stories that defy logic and explain the unexplainable. But before you go, here is a teaser you want to miss. What if an ancient curse was tied to a long-forgotten building, and those who tried to uncover its secrets were never seen again? Stay tuned to find out what happens when one man defies the odds and confronts the paranormal world head-on. Hit that notification bell, and you won't want to miss our next chilling investigation. Trust me. It's one story that will make you question what's really lurking in the shadows.